When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. That's the part that surprises me most, even now when I think back on it. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad, not right at that moment. I just felt quiet, like the whole world had gone silent, and I was watching myself from somewhere far away, being very, very polite. Her name is Vanessa. She stood there in my kitchen, in a house that had been my home for 42 years, holding a set of my good teacups. They were a wedding gift from my own mother, delicate little things with painted roses on the side. And she was wrapping them in newspaper, not carefully, just quickly, like she was packing away old clothes for a charity bin. She said, "We think it's for the best, Eloise. You'll have your own space. You'll be happier." She called me Eloise, not Mom. She'd never called me Mom. I always pretended it didn't hurt, but it did. A small sting every single time, like a little pinch. My son, Mark, was standing by the back door, looking out at the garden. He was staring at the old oak tree, the one where we'd hung a swing for him when he was 5. His back was to me. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, this tall, handsome man I'd raised, and he let his wife pack up my life in old newspapers. I looked at the teacups. I thought about my mother's hands holding them. I thought about all the mornings I'd used one, sitting alone at this very table, watching the sun come up. And I heard myself say, "Of course, Vanessa. If that's what you think is best." I smiled. A real smile, too. It felt strange on my face, like a mask I'd put on for a party I didn't want to go to. Mark finally turned around. He looked relieved. "See, Mom? I knew you'd understand." He walked over and gave me a quick hug, a pat on the back. A hug you give a friend, not a mother. "It's not far. Just 20 minutes away. We'll visit all the time." I nodded. "Of course," I said again. My voice sounded far away. The truth is, I had been understanding for a very long time. Too long, maybe. I understood when they got married, and she wanted to decorate the house in her own way. I understood when they stopped coming for Sunday dinner because they were tired. I understood when my grandson, Jacob, started looking at me like I was a stranger he had to be polite to. I understood it all. I just didn't know that understanding meant you had to let go of everything, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of you in your own home. Vanessa finished wrapping the last teacup and placed it in a cardboard box marked, "Kitchen, Fragile." She looked around the room, at my recipe box on the counter, my little fern on the windowsill. "We'll have the movers come for the big stuff on Saturday," she said. "This apartment, it's really lovely, Eloise. You'll see. It's smaller, easier for you to manage." Easier. That's the word they used. It was easier for me to be out of the way. It was easier for them to have the house to themselves. It was easier to move the old woman to a little apartment where she could be comfortable and quiet and easy. I picked up a photograph from the mantelpiece. It was Mark on his first day of school. He was so small in his little blue shorts, holding his lunchbox with both hands. He was smiling, but it was a nervous smile. He'd wanted me to stay with him. He'd cried. I had to kneel down and promise him I'd be right there at the gate when school was out. "I'll be waiting for you," I'd said. "Always." I put the photograph carefully into the box. I wondered if he remembered that. So that's where our story really begins. Not with the move, but with that smile. The smile I gave them when they took my home. It was the smile of a woman who had spent her whole life being a mother and had just realized that her job was over. It was time to be quiet. It was time to be easy. It was time to go. Let me tell you about that house. It wasn't a big house, not by today's standards. Just a small 3-bedroom place on a quiet street. We bought it when Mark was just a baby. My late husband, Frank, and I. Frank worked down at the hardware store, and I did people's hair in a little room off the kitchen. That's how we made it work. The house had a good feeling to it. The floors slanted a little, and the doors stuck in the summer when it was humid. But the light in the kitchen in the morning was golden, and you could hear the rain on the roof so clearly it was like music. That kitchen table. Oh, that table. It was just a plain wooden thing we got secondhand. But it was the center of our world. Mark did his homework there, his little tongue sticking out as he tried to write his letters. I shelled peas there, listening to the radio. Frank read the paper there every evening after supper, the pages rustling softly. It was on that table that we celebrated birthdays, with a simple cake and a single candle. It was where we sat in shock the day we heard the news about President Kennedy. It was where Frank held my hand when the doctor told us his heart was weak. And it was at that table, years later, that Vanessa sat and told me she was pregnant with Jacob. I'll never forget that moment. She seemed so soft, so young. I reached across the table and took her hand, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. A need for a mother, maybe. I was so happy. I thought, this is it. Now we will be a real family. I tried so hard after that. When Jacob was born, I was there. I didn't push, I just tried to be helpful. I'd go over and do the laundry so she could rest. I'd hold the baby while she took a long shower. I'd make her favorite meals, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and leave them on her doorstep with a note. I thought that was what you did. I thought love was about showing up and being useful. For a little while it seemed to work. She'd call me for advice on colic. She'd let me babysit on a Saturday night so they could go to the movies. I'd sit in their house, in the quiet, with little Jacob asleep in my arms, and I'd feel that familiar warmth, the feeling of being needed. It's a powerful thing, being needed. It gives you a reason to get up in the morning, but things started to shift. It was slow, like the tide going out. You don't notice it at first, until you look up and the water is miles away. First, it was the advice. I'd say, when Mark had a rash like that, I used a little cornstarch. And Vanessa would smile, a tight little smile, and say, the pediatrician says we should use this special cream now, Eloise. It's more modern. Modern. That became a popular word. Then it was the visits. Sunday dinner went from every week to twice a month to we'll see, Mom. Things are just so busy. I understood. They were busy. They had friends and parties and Jacob's soccer games. My world was getting smaller and theirs was getting bigger. That's how it should be, I told myself. Then, Frank passed away. It was a cold Tuesday in November. He just didn't wake up. The doctor said it was peaceful. But for me, the silence in that house was anything but peaceful. It was deafening. I'd walk into the kitchen and expect to see him there, rustling his paper. I'd set the table for one, and just stare at the empty space where his chair used to be. Mark was wonderful at the funeral. He held my arm. He looked so much like his father, it hurt to look at him. He told me, Mom, you're not alone. We're here for you. And for a while they were. They came over more often. Vanessa even brought a casserole. We sat at my kitchen table, the four of us, me, Mark, Vanessa, and little Jacob, who was maybe 4 then. And it felt almost like before. Almost like family. But grief is a lonely road. And after a few months, the visits tapered off again. The phone calls became shorter. Life went on for them. It had to. I understood that. I spent a lot of time understanding that. I started going to the park by myself. I'd sit on a bench and watch the young mothers push their strollers. I'd see them on their phones or talking to each other, and I'd remember what it felt like to be so tired and so full of love at the same time. I wasn't jealous. I just felt invisible, like I was watching a movie of life, but I wasn't in it anymore. The house got quieter. I'd talk to myself sometimes just to hear a voice. I'd say, well, Eloise, time for tea. Or, look at that rain. It sounds sad, I know, but it wasn't always sad. It was just quiet. I had my routines. Morning coffee, a walk to the store, a little gardening in the backyard. Afternoon tea, always at 3 o'clock, using one of my mother's teacups. That was my anchor. That little ritual. Holding that delicate cup, feeling the warmth in my hands, remembering my mother's hands. It was a connection to something. I still had hope. I kept a photograph of Jacob on the fridge. He was getting so big. 7, then 8, then 9. He was all legs and missing teeth. When he came over, he'd be polite, but restless. He'd want to go home. He had video games there, and his own TV. Here there was just me, and a box of old toys his father had played with. They seemed boring to him. I understood. I'd try to make it fun. I'd bake cookies, his favorite, chocolate chip. He'd eat 3, then ask, Grandma, can we go home soon? That word, home, it stung a little. This was my home. But to him, It was just his grandma's house. A place you visit, not a place you live. Vanessa started dropping him off less and less. She'd say he had a playdate or a birthday party. You understand, Eloise. And I did. I always did. So I sat at my kitchen table, day after day, with my tea and my memories. I watched the seasons change through the window. The snow melting, the daffodils coming up, the leaves turning brown and falling. The house, once so full of life and noise, had become a museum of my life. And I was the only one left to visit. I never saw it coming. The conversation that would change everything. I thought we were just coasting along, me in my quiet world, them in their busy one. I didn't realize that my quiet world was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. Then one Tuesday evening the phone rang. It was Mark, and his voice sounded different. "Mom," he said, "Vanessa and I want to come over and talk to you on Saturday. About something important." My heart jumped. Maybe they were having another baby. Maybe they needed my help. The old hope flickered. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "I'll make a cake." That I spent the next few days in a happy flutter. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, even the places nobody would see, like the tops of the cupboards. I dusted all the photographs. I polished the kitchen table until it gleamed. On Saturday morning, I went to the bakery and bought a nice coffee cake, the kind with the crumbly topping that Mark always liked. I set out my good teacups, the rose-painted ones, for me and Vanessa. For Mark, I got out his old favorite mug, the chipped one that said, "World's Best Dad." He'd given it to Frank one Father's Day, years ago. I thought he'd get a kick out of using it. They arrived right at 2 o'clock. Punctual. That should have been my first clue. When you're coming for a friendly visit, you're a little late. When you have business, you're on time. I opened the door with a big smile.
Come in, come in.
"Oh, it's so good to see you both." Mark gave me a quick hug. Vanessa gave me a little wave and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a business smile. "Something smells good, Mom," Mark said, but his voice was flat. "Just coffee cake," I said, leading them to the kitchen. Sit down, sit down. I'll put the kettle on." They sat at the table. Mark in Frank's old spot, Vanessa across from him. I busied myself with the kettle, filling it at the sink, my hands trembling just a little. Why was I nervous? This was my son. This was my family. "So," I said, trying to sound cheerful, "what's this important news? Is it about Jacob? Did he win his science fair?" Vanessa and Mark exchanged a look. That look. I'd seen it before. It was the "you tell her" look. Mark cleared his throat.
"No, Mom.
"Jacob's fine. It's about us. About the house." I put the kettle on the stove and turned to face them. The house. Vanessa leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. Her nails were perfectly done, a soft pink. "Eloise, Mark and I have been talking a lot. We've been thinking about the future. Jacob is getting older, and we need more space. This neighborhood is good, and, well, we've been looking at houses. And we found one. But to afford it, we need to sell this one." I blinked. I looked at Mark. He was studying the pattern on the tablecloth. "Sell this house." I repeated, the words not quite making sense. "But this is my house." "We know, Mom," Mark said, finally looking up. His eyes were pleading. "But it's too big for you, isn't it? All these rooms, the stairs. It's a lot for one person. And the money from the sale would set us up. It would let us buy the new place, and we could get you a nice little apartment. Something modern, easier to take care of. No yard work, no maintenance." The kettle started to whistle. A shrill, insistent sound. I just stood there, frozen. My mind was a blank, white space. All the little things from the past few years suddenly came rushing at me, not one by one, but all at once, like a wave. The tight smiles. The word modern. The less frequent visits. They weren't just living their lives. They were planning. Planning for a future that didn't include me in this house. Vanessa filled the silence. "It's a wonderful retirement community, Eloise. They have activities, bingo, movie nights. You'll make friends your own age. You won't be so alone." Alone. There it was. The word they'd been thinking for years. I wasn't a mother in a family home. I was a lonely old woman in a. Quick, pat on the back hugs. It'll be okay, Mom. You'll see. And then they were gone. I sat at the table for a long time after they left. The kitchen grew dark. The cake sat untouched under its plastic dome. I looked at the 3 cups on the table. My mother's teacup for Vanessa, Mark's chipped mug, and my own. They were just objects, just cups. But they felt like symbols of a family that no longer existed. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through the house, room by room. I ran my hand along the wall in the hallway where we'd marked Mark's height every year. Little pencil lines with dates next to them. 1978, 1980, 1985. The mark stopped when he was 15. Too cool for measuring, I guessed. I stood in his old bedroom. It was a guest room now, with a bed nobody ever slept in. I could still see him in there, a teenager with posters on the wall, doing his homework with music playing too loud. I remembered the arguments, the slammed doors, the teenage silences. I thought those were the hard times. I had no idea. I ended up back in the kitchen at the table. I thought about Frank. What would he say? He'd be heartbroken, not angry. Frank was never angry, just deeply, quietly sad. He'd trusted Mark. He'd loved him so much. To see his son do this, it would have broken his heart. In the morning, I made myself a cup of tea. I used one of my mother's teacups. I held it, and I thought of her. She had lived with us in her final years. I remembered how she'd get in the way in the kitchen, or forget things. Had I been impatient with her? Had I made her feel like a burden? I tried to remember.
I hope de hadn't te.
I hoped I'd been kind. Maybe this was my punishment. For every time I'd been short with my own mother. For every time I'd seen her as a responsibility instead of a gift. Maybe this was just the way of things. The circle of life, they call it. But it felt more like a circle of pain. A few days later, Mark called. "Have you thought about it, Mom?" His voice was eager. He was probably anxious about the house they wanted to buy. "Yes, Mark," I said. My voice was steady. "I've thought about it, and..." I paused. I could say no. I could dig my heels in. I could make them fight for it. But what would be the point? They'd resent me. The visits would stop completely. Jacob would grow up hearing about the difficult grandmother who wouldn't sell her house. I'd be alone, in a house full of memories, but truly alone. Or I could go. I could make it easy for them. I could give them what they wanted. Maybe, just maybe, my sacrifice would buy me a place in their new life. Maybe they'd be grateful. Maybe they'd visit me in my little apartment. Maybe Jacob would come for Sunday lunch. It was a small hope. A tiny, fragile thing. But it was all I had left. "Okay," I whispered into the phone. "If it's what you need, I'll do it." I heard Mark exhale. "Oh, Mom, that's great. That's really great. You won't regret it, I promise." And that brings me back to where I started. To Vanessa in my kitchen, packing my mother's teacups in newspaper. To my son, staring out at the garden, unable to look at me. To my smile. The smile I gave them when they took everything. The apartment was exactly as Vanessa had described it. Modern. Small. Efficient. It was on the second floor of a building that looked just like every other building on the street. Beige brick, green lawns, trimmed bushes. It was clean and quiet and soulless. Moving day was a blur of men in uniforms carrying boxes. Mark was there directing traffic, looking important. Vanessa was there with a clipboard, checking things off a list. I sat on a hard chair in the corner of my new living room, clutching my handbag, trying to stay out of the way. The movers put my sofa there, my armchair there. They set up my bed in the tiny bedroom. It all looked wrong. My furniture, my things, they didn't belong in this sterile beige box. They looked old and shabby when the last box was dropped in the middle of the floor. Vanessa came over, all efficiency and smiles. "All done. See? That wasn't so bad, was it?" She handed me a set of keys. "Here you go. Home sweet home." Home. I looked around at the bare white walls, the unfamiliar light from the window, the pile of boxes. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a waiting room. Mark gave me a hug. "We'll come by this weekend to help you unpack, okay, Mom?" Well, bring lunch. They left. The door clicked shut behind them. And the silence that filled that apartment was even worse than the silence in my old house. In my old house, the silence had been filled with echoes. I could hear the ghost of Frank's newspaper, the memory of Mark's footsteps on the stairs. Here there was nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a television from the apartment next door. I sat on my sofa for a long time. I didn't cry. I was too tired. I just sat there, in the middle of my strange new life, and watched the sun move across the floor and disappear. The weekend came. They didn't. I waited all day Saturday. I made a pot of coffee, then threw it out when it got cold. I arranged some cushions on the sofa. I put a photograph of Frank on the little shelf by the TV. By Sunday evening, I knew they weren't coming. I didn't call. What would I say? You forgot about me? That sounded needy. That sounded like a burden. On Monday, I started to unpack by myself. It was slow, hard work. My back ached from bending over boxes. I found my mother's teacups, wrapped in the newspaper Vanessa had used. I unwrapped them carefully and placed them in the kitchen cabinet. They looked so out of place next to the cheap, modern dishes that had come with the apartment. But seeing them there made me feel a tiny bit better. A tiny bit of me, in this place that wasn't me. A few days later, Mark and Vanessa did come. They brought Jacob. Jacob was 10 now, all elbows and knees. He looked around the apartment with curious eyes. It's small.
Grandma, he said.
It wasn't mean, just an observation. A fact. It's cozy, I said, smiling. Do you want a cookie? I baked some. He ate a cookie, then spent the rest of the visit looking at his phone. Mark and Vanessa sat on my sofa, looking uncomfortable. The conversation was stilted. We talked about the weather. We talked about the new house they were buying. They showed me pictures on Vanessa's phone. It was beautiful. Bigger than my old house. A brand new kitchen. A big yard for Jacob. I said all the right things. How lovely. What a beautiful kitchen. Jacob will love that yard. They stayed for an hour. When they left, Mark said, "We'll come again soon, Mom." And I nodded and smiled. But I knew that soon meant a month, maybe 2. This was how it would be. Duty visits. Checking the box.
And it was.
The visits became once a month, then every 6 weeks. They'd call on a Sunday afternoon. "We're thinking of coming by next weekend if you're free." If I'm free. My calendar was emptier than a church on Monday. I was always free. I tried to make the best of it. I joined the building's social club, like Vanessa suggested. I went to a few bingo nights. I sat with other women my age. We chat about our aches and pains, our children who never called, our grandchildren we hardly saw. It was comforting in a way, to know I wasn't alone in my aloneness. But they weren't my friends. They were just other people in the same boat, floating in the same quiet sea. I'd sit in my armchair in the evenings, watching TV with the sound low, and I'd think about my old house. I'd picture the kitchen in the morning, all golden light. I'd picture the rain on the roof. I'd picture Frank in his chair, reading his paper. I missed it with a physical ache, a hollow feeling in my chest. I'd call Mark sometimes, just to hear his voice. The conversations were always the same.
Short.
Polite. How's work?
Fine.
How's Jacob?
Good.
Busy with school. How's the house?
Great.
We're loving it. A pause. Well, I should let you go, Mom. Dinner's almost ready. Okay, sweetheart. Love you. Love you too.
Bye. Click.
And I'd be alone again with the hum of the refrigerator. I started to notice little things. He never asked me to come over to their new house. Not once. Not for dinner, not for Jacob's birthday, not for a cup of tea. They'd always come to me for their short, duty visits. I told myself it was because they knew it was hard for me to get out. But a small, sad voice in my head whispered the truth. They didn't want me in their new home. It was their space, their life. I didn't fit there. Then one day, I saw a picture on social media. Jacob's school had a little app where they posted photos. I checked it sometimes just to see his face. And there it was. A picture of Jacob's birthday party. He was turning 12. There was a big homemade cake. There were balloons. And there were people. Mark, Vanessa, a bunch of kids I didn't know. And in the background, smiling, were Vanessa's parents. The party had been that past weekend. The weekend they were supposed to visit me. They'd called and canceled, saying Jacob had a lot of homework. I stared at the picture for a long time. I wasn't angry. I was past anger. I was just empty. The last little thread of hope, the one that had kept me going, finally snapped. It didn't make a sound. It just let go. He had a new family now. A complete family. It included Vanessa, her parents, their friends, their new house. It didn't include me. I wasn't part of the picture. I was just an obligation. A box to be checked once a month, a duty to be performed. I turned off the phone and put it down. I looked at my mother's teacup on the side table. I thought about all the love I'd poured into raising him. All the sleepless nights, the worried days, the endless, quiet sacrifices. And for what? To end up here alone? Looking at a picture of my grandson's birthday party on a screen. That was the real turning point. Not the move. Not the conversation at the kitchen table. It was that picture. It was the moment I realized that in his story, my role was over. The curtain had come down, and I was still on stage, in an empty theater, waiting for an applause that would never come. I was a ghost in my own life. After seeing that picture, something shifted inside me. The sadness didn't go away, but it changed. It settled deeper, and around it, a kind of quiet acceptance started to grow, like a field after fire. It looks barren and dead, but underneath, the roots are still there, waiting. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I stopped planning what I'd cook for their next visit. I started to live in a smaller, more manageable world. My world. The four walls of my apartment. The daily walk to the corner store. The old movies on TV in the afternoon. The little fern on the windowsill that I managed to keep alive. I found comfort in small rituals. Every morning, I'd have my tea in my mother's cup, and I'd sit by the window and watch the world wake up. I'd see the young people hurrying to their cars, the mothers walking their children to the school bus. I was separate from it all, but I was also a witness. And that was okay. One afternoon, about 6 months after I'd seen the picture, there was a knock on my door. My heart did a little flutter. Maybe it was Mark. Maybe he'd felt my absence. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Mark. It was Jacob. He was 13 now, tall and lanky, with a shy smile. He was alone. "Grandma," he said. It was more of a question, like he wasn't sure he had the right person. "Jacob." "Oh my goodness, come in, sweetheart." I was so surprised, I didn't know what to do. "Is everything okay? Where are your parents?" He shuffled inside, looking around the apartment like he was seeing it for the first time. "They're at work. I got out of school early today. Doctor's appointment. I told them I'd just go home. But I don't know. I asked the bus driver if this was your stop. He said yes." I led him to the sofa. He sat on the edge, looking uncomfortable. I sat in my armchair across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I just looked at him. He had his father's eyes. Frank's eyes. "Do you want something to eat?" I asked softly. "I have cookies. Or I could make you a sandwich." He shook his head. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were troubled. "Grandma, why don't you ever come to our house?" The question caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say. "Well, sweetheart, your parents are very busy. I don't want to be in the way." He frowned. "Mom's mom comes over all the time. She's always there. She helped with my party." He looked down at his hands. "I saw your picture on the app. My birthday. You weren't there." My heart ached for him. For this boy caught in the middle of things he didn't understand. "I saw it too," I said quietly. "It looked like a lovely party." He looked up, his young face full of a confusion he couldn't quite articulate. "Why weren't you there? Don't you like us anymore?" That broke me. Not the sadness of my own situation, but the thought that this child thought I had pulled away, that I didn't care. "Oh, Jacob, no," I said, getting up and going to sit next to him on the sofa. I put my arm around his bony shoulders. "That's not it at all. I love you more than anything. You must never, ever think that." "Then why?" he asked again, his voice small. How could I explain it to him? How could I tell him about the conversation in the kitchen, about the boxes, about the slow, painful distance his parents had created? I couldn't. He was just a child. Sometimes, I said slowly, choosing my words with care, grown-ups have complicated feelings. Things get busy. People forget. But it's not because they don't love each other. It's just life gets in the way. He leaned his head against my shoulder just for a second, the way he used to when he was little. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like a gift. A pure, simple gift. He didn't stay long. He had to get home before his parents noticed he was gone. Before he left, he said, "Maybe you could come to my baseball game sometime. I'm pretty good." I smiled. A real smile. I would love that, Jacob. I would love that more than anything. After he left, I sat for a long time. That small visit had changed something. It had reminded me that the love was still there in him. It was buried under the layers of his parents' distance, but it was still there. And maybe that was enough. A few weeks later, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, on a piece of paper, with a pen. I wrote it to Mark. I didn't accuse him. I didn't list all the ways he'd hurt me. I just told him my truth. Dear Mark, I'm writing this because it's easier for me to say it this way. I don't want you to feel guilty, or to think I'm angry. I'm not. I just want you to understand something. When your father and I bought that little house, we didn't buy it as an investment. We bought it as a place to build a family. Every room held a piece of our love for you. When I agreed to sell it, I did it because I loved you, and I thought it would make your life easier. I thought it would bring us closer. I know you're busy. I know you have your own life. That's how it should be. A parent's job is to raise a child to leave them, and I did my job. I'm proud of the man you've become. But I need you to know that I'm still here. I'm not just a memory from your childhood. I'm a person, sitting in this small apartment, with a heart that is still full of love for you and for Jacob. I don't need Sunday dinners every week. I don't need grand gestures. I just need to know that I'm not forgotten. I would love to see Jacob's baseball game. I would love to see your new house. Just once. I would love to sit at your kitchen table and have a cup of tea, even for 10 minutes. If that's too much, I understand. I will always understand. That's what mothers do. I love you, Mark. I always have, and I always will.
Mom.
I mailed it the next day. I didn't expect a response. I just needed to say it. I needed to put my heart out there, one last time, and let it go. It was like releasing a bird from a cage. Whether it flies back to you or not, at least it's free. For a week, nothing happened. I went about my quiet routines. I went for my walks. I had my tea by the window. The silence in my apartment felt different now. It wasn't an empty, waiting silence. It was a peaceful one. I had said my piece. The rest was up to them. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, there was another knock at my door. When I opened it, Mark was standing there, alone. He looked different. Older, maybe. His eyes were red-rimmed. He was holding a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. My letter. He didn't say a word. He just stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. A real hug. Not a quick, pat-on-the-back hug. A real, tight holding-on hug like he was a little boy again, and I was his whole world.
He held me for a long time.
And I held him back. I felt his shoulders shake. I felt the wetness of his tears on my neck. And I cried too, silently. All the tears I'd held back for years. Finally, he pulled back, just enough to look at me. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry.
I didn't see.
I was so busy with my own life. I stopped seeing you. I'm so sorry." I cupped his face in my hands, the way I used to when he was small. "It's okay," I said softly. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He came in, and we sat on the sofa. He told me everything. He told me about the pressure from Vanessa, about wanting to give his family the best, about how he'd convinced himself he was doing the right thing. He told me he'd felt guilt for years but didn't know how to fix it. He said after reading my letter, he'd shown it to Vanessa. They'd had a long, hard talk. She had read it, and she had cried. She hadn't realized either. She'd been so focused on building her own perfect family, she hadn't seen the person she was leaving behind. She wants to see you, Mom, he said. She's ashamed. She doesn't know if you'll want to see her. I thought about Vanessa, about the tight smiles, the efficient packing, the birthday party. I thought about how easy it was to blame her, but blame felt heavy. It felt like carrying a stone in my pocket. I was too old for heavy things. Of course I'll see her, I said. We all make mistakes, Mark. We all get lost sometimes. What matters is finding our way back. The first time I went to their new house, I was nervous. Mark picked me up. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw it was even bigger and more beautiful than the pictures. Vanessa was waiting at the front door. She looked different, smaller, somehow, unsure. I got out of the car and walked up the path. She met me halfway. Eloise, she started, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. For everything. I looked at this woman who had been a part of my life for so long, a part I'd never quite understood. And for the first time, I didn't see a rival. I didn't see the woman who took my son away. I just saw another person, trying to build her own life, and making mistakes along the way, just like the rest of us. I reached out and took her hand. Vanessa, I said softly. It's okay. Let's start fresh. She burst into tears then, and I held her, right there in her perfect front yard. It was strange and wonderful. Two women finally seeing each other. Inside, their house was lovely, light and airy. Mark gave me a tour. Jacob showed me his room. And then Vanessa led me to
Kitchen.
It was a beautiful kitchen, all granite and stainless steel. She gestured to the table. Would you like a cup of tea? She asked. It was such a simple question, but it felt like an olive branch. A peace offering. I'd love one, I said. She made the tea, and we sat at her kitchen table. She used her own cups, modern ones. And it was perfect.
We didn't talk about the past.
We talked about Jacob, about her job, about a recipe she was trying. It was just tea. Normal, simple, human tea. That was months ago. Things aren't perfect now, and they never will be. The hurt doesn't just disappear. It leaves a scar. But scars aren't always bad. They're just signs that you've healed. Mark comes to see me every week now, sometimes twice. He brings Jacob, and they stay for a real visit. We play cards. We watch old movies.
We talk.
And sometimes, just sometimes, Mark will sit in my armchair and put his feet up, and for a second I see Frank. And it makes me smile. Jacob comes on his own sometimes, too. He likes to sit and tell me about his friends, about the video games he plays. He's not a little boy anymore. He's growing up so fast. But he still leans his head on my shoulder when he's tired, and in those moments, I feel a love so deep and pure, it fills up all the empty spaces. And Vanessa and I have found a new kind of peace. She calls me now just to chat. She asks my advice on things. Last week, she brought over a plant for my window. She said it reminded her of the one I used to have in my old kitchen. She called me Mom. It slipped out, and she blushed. But I just smiled and said, "Thank you, sweetheart." And it felt right. I still live in my little apartment. It's still small and beige. But it doesn't feel like a waiting room anymore. It feels like my home. My cozy, quiet home. I have my routines. My morning tea in my mother's cup by the window. My walks. My old movies. But now the phone rings, and it's not just the doctor's office. It's Mark. Or Jacob, or even Vanessa. And sometimes, on a Sunday, I set the table for 4, and they all come over. We don't have a big kitchen.
We squeeze in.
We eat off our laps. And it's loud and messy and wonderful. I look at my mother's teacup sometimes. I think about all the things it has seen. The hands that have held it. And I realize that love is a lot like that cup. It's delicate. It can be chipped. It can be put away in a box for a long time. But it's also strong. It can be taken out, filled with something warm, and shared again. It's never too late. He stopped visiting after he met her. That's how this story started. But that's not how it ends. It ends not with a door closing, but with a door opening. It ends with a phone that rings. It ends with a cup of tea shared between two people who finally see each other. It ends with a mother's love, which is patient and kind and waits, quietly, in a small apartment, for her son to find his way home. And that's the lesson, I suppose. That love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go and trusting that what's real will find its way back to you. It might take a long time. It might come in a different form than you expected. But if it's real, it will come. You just have to be there, with the kettle on, ready to make a fresh pot of tea. Because in the end, after all the moving and the silence and the hurt, that's all any of us really want. Someone to share a quiet cup of tea with. Someone to say, I'm here. I see you. And I'm glad you came back.